All right, welcome back to the Clean Energy Edge podcast, everybody. My name's Russ Bates. Here with me, my Canadian co-host, Brian Scott. Brian, how are you?
Doing very well today, Russ. How about yourself?
Pretty good, pretty good. As we were talking, never a dull moment here in the U.S. I miss dull, but hey, that's where we're at. It's been a couple weeks and there's been a lot happening in the last few weeks. So wanted to do some catch up, and a lot happening in Canada. Had some elections, things like that. So we wanted to dig into, really what are some of the important shifts that are going on in North America, and really related to energy relations between the U.S. and Canada, who have always been very, very close, partnered up, all that good stuff. And really kind of talk that out of where we're at today in roughly the middle of May, right? So let's break it down. And Brian, there's a few things. I think we got a few talking points to look at. The Canadian oil exports, obviously the tariffs that are a part of that. And, Canada has floated some retaliation, diversification types of things that have never been, on the table before, and never really needed to be. So, Brian, for those outside of Canada, how much of I guess, a wake-up call have these tariffs been, both politically and economically? And what are you seeing in the Canadian media and the government that really tells a story?
It's a time like I've never seen in my lifetime. While I can't say that we've unified, I would say we're probably more unified than we've been in a long time. Canada really has like a 5-party political system. It gets very coalition-y around election time and around like passing different bills and whatnot. But the defensiveness, the fear within the public really caused a lot of people that were not considering voting for Liberal to leave their party of choice and vote Liberal. Most people had enough of the Liberals. To be honest, they've been in power for almost 10 years. They'd had enough of Trudeau. But in steps kind of a statesman-like prime minister candidate that is well-respected internationally, that said the right things, that pushed back at Trump, where the conservative candidate was really hesitant to push back at Trump, right? Some of his base is kind of that maple mega, as they call them. So he was afraid to offend that group, didn't want to push back too far, and it cost him the election. The truth is, like, these tariffs have basically decided the outcome of the election. While I supported Carney, I think a lot of people would agree the election outcome would have been drastically different. The opinion polls shifted drastically. The opinion polls on where we're going as a country from an energy standpoint, I would say, have shifted to the right, though, right? As far as there's way more openness to adding more pipelines, where there's been a lot of defensiveness, environmental defensiveness to this in the past few years, the past decade, really. Now all these pipelines that were, not considered or considered and turned down are very much on the table. Carney is a little bit more of a centrist from that standpoint, wants to eliminate kind of the over bureaucratic way we review projects like that here. So it does have the potential, to be honest, of unifying the country if the left gives the right enough of what they want, that it makes it harder for them to complain. Trump could be the saint of Canada. In a lot of ways, he could be what reconciles what he kind of broke in a lot of ways, right? Because we've been divisive for a lot of years, but we've really followed that American pattern of divisiveness in the last 20 years. Ever since Trump came into power or leading up to power, there was a lot more vitriol, a lot more ugly rhetoric. It became very, I don't know, passionate and angry here, just like there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's what you're seeing. You're seeing this defensiveness. How can we be energy independent, right? Where that really wasn't like a typical conversation here, to be honest. We wanted clean energy or oil energy or whatever it may be. Everybody had their ideal, but the term kind of energy independence and not being reliant on the States wasn't really something that that seriously considered. And I think part of it is, fear of waking up the sleeping bear, maybe. Right? Like,
Yeah.
Canada always liked their relationship with the States. We don't want to be American. But we want to have that relationship.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on some very important points, and the one that sticks out for me is the relationship with the U.S. was always one that Canada and the U.S. I think always was going to be a very close relationship. Where whenever you're talking about pipelines going, east and west, why if I'm Canadian, and I guess the thought was, why do we need to do this? We've got the U.S. That's a reliable partner that we can send our energy to, and now Canada's rethinking that, if I understand correctly, and saying maybe we shouldn't put all our eggs in the U.S. basket, and we need to, have some other options. Is that fair?
It's it's completely fair to say. And to your point, we have such a even electrical grids. We have such a north south kind of approach to pipelines, electrical grids, all that sort of stuff. I don't think the average person really realizes how much that infrastructure exists and how intermingled it is between our countries. But to your point, it could very much lead into this um, building out of very large scale projects to be more east west to protect. But in my view, I don't think there's anything wrong with energy independence. I don't think there's anything wrong with the plan in a lot of ways. But let's be honest. If Canada says we are going to build a pipeline west to east, and we're going to supply the Eastern Canadian market with oil, with Canadian oil, instead of taking it from the States, well, I feel like the obvious retaliation is going to take place. Do you know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
feel like you're going to see the US necessarily want to buy their oil from the West as much anymore. It's a relationship of convenience to a certain degree, right? It makes sense. But
Yeah.
if you're going to lose, if somebody's going to stop buying from you, you might want to stop buying from them when this is this back and forth yin and yang relationship.
Yeah, when he makes he meaning Trump makes statements that we don't need Canadian, vehicles, we don't need Canadian lumber. He even goes so he said Canadian energy, and I think he even went so far as to say we don't want it. I mean, okay, fine. Others do, and I guess that gets into Canada is looking, I understand, to export more energy to Europe and Asia. That normally maybe that comes to the States, but okay, well if you don't want it, U.S. Hey, there's other buyers that Canada can look to. Is that something that is actively happening?
There's been so many projects that have been proposed over the last 20 years to get more oil and gas to the shore, right, to the east and the west coast, especially the west coast, that oil companies have been strong proponents of. The western, I shouldn't even say western, the Prairie Province premiers are both very conservative, and especially in Alberta, most of the social media content, the press releases, 90% of that of what they talk about is oil and gas. They don't see much else. They feel like as long as we're able to develop as we see fit, we will be very wealthy. And to a certain degree, they're not wrong, right? There's a lot of revenue in Alberta that comes from oil and gas through government coffers. All of these projects seem like they're back on the table. And because Carney has opened that door by saying, it's not going to be the same review process, because it's always been a province does an environmental assessment and then federally it has to get done. He said if it's done by a province, it doesn't need to be done again.
Okay.
Which does give the ability for all these projects that have already been assessed by the provinces to get greenlit federally. It's what these energy companies want. It's what some of these provinces want. The big debate is this Energy East pipeline that's been talked about for the last 20 years, taking Alberta oil and gas all the way to the Maritimes, the East Coast. It'd be a massive project, right? It's such a large distance, but there's always shareholders or stakeholders, as we talk about in projects, and going through provinces that need to buy in is one thing, but it's Quebec in particular and some of the First Nations lands that they would have to cross.
Sure.
Deals can typically be made. Quebec will be the question, though. Quebec has never liked this idea. Well, they are warming up to this idea, basically from the Trump approach.
Yeah, that can change, opinions and perspectives, for certain. And this this avenue, it will take some time, right? These projects, you don't just snap your fingers and they're done. Even once all the permitting and everything's good, the actual build is very, very time consuming, right? So, is there thoughts of, well, do we want to just kind of wait this out and see what happens, at the U.S. midterms, and if something changes? Because like the tariffs and everything involved, that's actually supposed to go through Congress here. That's a big debate here in the States. But it looks very likely that the Republicans are going to lose midterms, and Democrats can be back in power, thus challenging these things. So, is it, well, let's wait and see what happens in 2 years, but then you've lost 2 years of maybe building, or is it like, hey, let's do this, and whatever happens, happens?
It seems to be the latter, to be honest. I think most people are thinking, let's build this. Well, I think there's a bit of an understanding that, excuse me, getting the deals in place for this to go across all these jurisdictions is the real challenge. But to your point, the more significant measure to wait here is the timeline, right? If I had to guess based on other historical pipelines in Canada, this is probably a 10-year project. Based on distance, based on the fact it has to go through the Canadian Shield, which is as rocky as anything. While it might not be mountainous like when they went west, to me, it seems like an enormous project. And you know how things change so quickly in politics, right? In people's opinions.
Yeah.
To your point, this could very well get momentum. And then all of a sudden the US could be saying, no, we want to be friends again. And some people are going to say, no, they're right. Why are we spending all this money? Some people are going to be saying, no, this was the right thing, right? Like the general statements are not as much, we need to do this now because of Trump, but we need to do this now because of what if, right? If we want to be energy secure, if we want to have like a strong enough military, all of these things feel like today problems that are going to take the better part of a decade to solve. Whether it be military or energy independence, all of these sorts of things. They're massive investments. You can see the argument for both sides. You really can.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unprecedented for Canada and the U.S. to not be very, very friendly neighbors, and it really happened basically overnight, right? This wasn't something that was building and people could, see. The only foreshadowing was Trump saying, "Oh, Canada 51st state," and throwing some tariff talk out there. I don't believe anybody thought it would go where it has gone today. So yeah, if I'm in Canada, I'd be looking hard at like, hey, even if the U.S. is friendly, do we not still want to have this opportunity to do other things just in case, right? It's that diversification, like when you're investing. Do I want to put all my money into this stock and then maybe it tanks? I don't want all my money in Tesla and then something happens. Oh wait, that has happened. Luckily, I don't have all my money in that. So
Sure. I mean, and Trump tends to be, and I'm going to say this very carefully, Trump tends to be right on a lot of things if you give it no context. Right. The idea that, Americans would love everything to be built in the US. I feel like most countries feel that way, right? They would rather everything gets built in their own nation. That's logical. They would give me the context of every impact in between. And I think Canada, one thing he said about Canada that he's very much correct about is we've lived in a false sense of security, right? Because our big brother, the big world power economically, and more importantly for us militarily, maybe not more importantly because the economy is everything, but it's allowed Canada to underspend militarily for forever, right? To
sure.
some pressure, and to Trump's credit, in his first term, he started to change minds over here, and there's things in play where they're planning on ramping that up to get to that required number for NATO. But it's one of those things. We've had that false sense of security. And where do we land when all of this shakes out, right? If 10 years from now, if we're both much more divided by grids, by energy, all of this stuff economically, we're more self-sufficient, but maybe lost on growth. What does the relationship look like then? It'd be interesting to know. Like, I see some really interesting things being done by American politicians. Like, I want to say it's Vermont and Maine. Maybe it was just Vermont. Mayors from there, people from the state were in Montreal last week for an event that they set up, reaching out to Quebecers, basically saying, "Come back, come, trying to ramp up the tourism. We want you back. We're willing to take your money at our value." Basically saying they were willing to lose the 25 cents on the dollar, right? Like ridiculous numbers.
Yeah.
But they were reaching out. And like you see a lot of that from California, Washington State, reaching out across the board and saying, "We're not like this. We don't support this."
Right.
And I very much appreciate the intention, but I don't know, to the people I'm reaching out to, I think they appreciate it, but in a sense, it's kind of like, does it matter? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is 100% right. The view of the Trump administration is not the view of every single American. I'd say especially today when we're talking, I'm going to say it's in that 30, maybe 40%. It's definitely not over 50. From all the polls and everything that I've seen, they're very much unhappy with what's going on. But still, I mean, those mayors don't control, the border enforcement folks. They don't control the ICE agents that are out doing their thing. So I admire what they're doing, and I agree with their thought. But
yeah,
if I was Canadian, I don't know. I was in Mexico a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, I don't know. Hopefully I can get in okay. I should be. Everything should be fine. But then you hear some of those stories too. So yeah, if I was Canadian, you guys actually have some folks that were detained. Even an actress, I think, was a big story. So I get it. Do I really want to cross the border to go and to Maine? I don't know.
yeah,
Probably
yeah,
for me, I would say no.
yeah. And I think the relationship is still there to the level that, like, I don't think most Canadians dislike Americans or think Americans are bad people. I think it's this, wait a minute, there's the possibility enough people could vote in a direction in an American election that could strongly negatively affect our economy, our way of life, yada yada. It's a defense mechanism as opposed to we don't like you kind of thought process, I think.
Right. Right.
And it's, I don't know, maybe some good will come out of it. Maybe, stuff like interprovincial trade has been a big discussion because it's so overregulated here, with booze being like, there's a lot of alcohol that gets sold out of Ontario to the States and out of BC to the States, especially wines, just due to labeling requirements in different provinces, that it was easier to sell to the States than it was to sell to our own people, essentially, right? In another province. And those barriers are really coming down quickly, because there's this realization that, like, we're going to lose this part of our economy. Like, we just know we're not selling as much to you guys. So we need to buy more from ourselves. And you're seeing that, especially at liquor stores, pretty much everywhere but Alberta, where they've stopped selling American booze. All the Canadian brands are selling way more locally. Is it enough? I doubt it, but it's something. How does it stick? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it does. I'm always of the thought that if you can work locally with someone, like whenever we're doing projects, we want to work with someone who's local if we can. It doesn't always work, but if you can, that makes more sense because that's where they're from. They're going to take pride in that, and that helps the local economy. I mean, any project's going to help the local economy, but if we can have somebody who's maybe out of work and they may get in and start doing some solar work or battery storage or whatever, hey, that's wins for everybody. Why wouldn't we want to do that? But but whenever you can't, then you can't, right? So to your point of if somebody in Canada is making, a great liquor that I have been importing from the US, why wouldn't I just get what's here in Canada? You know, it, at least something to think about and maybe explore a little bit.
I mean, I think of myself personally, right? And whiskey is kind of my drink of choice. And I've drank my fair share of bourbon, right? Which is definitely an American product.
Yeah.
And we still have it on the shelves here in Alberta, and it's not selling as well. There's no doubt about that. Um, but I'm hesitant. I tend to have that moment where I'm like, oh, looking at it on the shelf, and then I pick something else, right? That's local or even European, because I don't feel like that's going on right now. But it's funny as we go through all these like scenarios that are impacting back and forth, it really feels like that off ramp we talked about right from the start. I don't want to say it's appeared. I'd like to say Trump built it out of necessity. Everything you hear from the UK trade deal, which is massive and all of that in theory, to the Chinese negotiations, to even what Canadian and other European officials are saying as far as like, they don't feel like getting this deal done is going to be that difficult, nor is it going to change much.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I look at the UK deal, so the UK, they had very small barriers for entry. That's one of the things they were saying is, the US has been treated so unfairly. We can't even get our products in on the shelves. Um, I guess that opened up a little bit, so, and there's a trade surplus. The US sends more stuff to the UK than the import. So UK really had everything going in their favor, right? And they made some concessions, and that 10% tariff didn't move. It's still on there. It was set at 10, it stayed at 10, or in this deal, which again is not a deal in my mind yet. It's just some talks. What does that make other countries want to do to what else would they want to concede, right? I mean, not everybody's going to want to do that. And your point with US and Canada, I mean, our energy systems, they're tightly linked, right? They're right now mutually dependent on each other. That integration, the cross-border transmission, all of that. I mean, I guess there's still ways that collaboration can happen, but I mean, do you think, because we're kind of talking about this earlier, but do you think that Canada is going to say, yeah, let's wait this out, and maybe if it's, we have a tariff where we didn't have before, we'll just kind of live like that, and that's the new world we're in? Or is Canada still saying, hey, 25%, that's not cool. And we just negotiated a deal with you a few years ago, Mr. Trump. So what's up?
I think the current prime minister is much like she was in China, very much empowered by the public to push back, even if it's bad for the economy. I think there's that support of not giving in, which isn't to say that I think we'll get the better of the deal, as much as to say that I don't think we will give in easily. Like that 25%, I think will have to go away, which isn't to say that Canada can force it to go away. It's to say that Canada will need a pretty reasonable deal to not keep pushing back for, whether it's a year or whatever it may be. I think most world leaders realize that they're kind of been empowered by their people to push back. Their people want to see them push back. And Trump is in a bad negotiating position because the American public is very vocally frustrated. It's an odd time. It's an odd time. And I would say the Canadian Prime Minister is also under a lot of, this situation creates a problem for him in that we become very open to pipelines. And because there's so much division between the left and the right, and I'm just going to call the right for the most part, the prairies, the oil and gas provinces, all this talk about potentially giving them more of what they want and then giving them nothing. There'll have to be somewhere in between, and maybe it's more pipelines to the coast, because that's the easier ones to approve. At the same time, it's like you start talking about giving people things and then you don't give it. I mean, Alberta passed a law or changed a law last week. The Conservative Party changed a law so that they need something like 10% of the people who voted in the last election in Alberta to trigger a referendum, because Alberta's premier has always talked about potentially separating from Canada. Now, it's almost legally impossible because of when this all happened 150 years ago. Alberta it's a treaty state, as they would call it. Like it's First Nations essentially own it. There's an agreement, but that agreement is with the country, not the province. Legally, it's almost an impossibility. But she's been using this, Premier Smith, to kind of fame those flames of I want this or else.
Yeah.
I don't know that Canada can give in too easily. I'll put it that way. They're almost like the prime minister's almost in a position where he's better off losing in the economy getting beat up. If he takes a deal, it's got to be a reasonable deal, and then he's got to be willing to give something to the West as concessions. Everybody feels like he's won. He's in a great spot. He's this economist. He's brilliant. If you look down the road, you can see there's going to be some scenarios that are going to put him in a unenviable position for sure.
Yeah. Politics is the same, whether it's in Canada or the U.S. China, probably a little bit different. I'm sure it's a little bit different, but yeah. What about Ford and the tariffs that he was looking at, and even shutting off energy to the U.S. I haven't heard anything about that. I know it was real big a month ago, and then it just kind of died off. You know anything about that now?
It happened for like a weekend or something. Like a few days, those electricity tariffs were in place. The grand total wasn't anything drastic. I remember they were talking about it, but the Conservative premier of Ontario, which is the biggest province, largest population anyway, has really been hand in hand with the newly elected Liberal prime minister, and he's kind of like willing to give him the space to work a deal.
Okay.
He's been very supportive, but it's been pretty clear, like, if they feel like this isn't going to work out, they're going to ratchet back up and defend their people. He's kind of got a populist, feel good kind of aura to him that people like. He's not necessarily,
right?
Yeah, and he's not necessarily getting on with the further right conservatives from the other parts of the country. He's got to be tougher.
So Ford and Doug Ford and the Prime Minister Carney, they're working together, and they're communicating on strategy, and basically Ford has said, Carney, do your thing, let me know, and we're united in Canada, and whatever we need to end up doing, we'll do.
Yeah, that's where it stands right now. And I think, like I said, I think the prime minister has a lot of support, like, to just do what he sees best. Not to say that anything he does is going to be supported, but when you have this off ramp and people are feeling like a deal is imminent or close, I think it'll get there. I think it's going to be very similar to what we've seen with the UK and China. Is Trump just needs something he can claim victory on, right? And who knows what that is. I don't think we're going to see a giant trade deal. I just don't think it's going to be drastically different from what we've seen.
I tend to agree. And I mean, if you compare this, this is a relationship between the two countries. So if you compare it to, like a marriage, right? The U.S. and Canada, they're not divorced yet. They've been separated and spatting and talking to the lawyers, but maybe it's not a full, let's pack the bags and be gone forever.
Exactly.
It's something that needs to be worked out, and hopefully it will be, because again, it's a great relationship. It always has been for a long time, but I
I
mean,
think the next president is going to be maybe the most influential in kind of history of the relationship, just for the fact that if they have that olive branch, they take that approach. I think Canada, just being the country we are, is more likely to, reunite, make friends, all these sorts of things. Whereas if you have a Democrat that is fairly protectionist and wants to keep pushing that, I think it would be hard to come back from.
I think you're right. I think if someone else goes in there and they keep pushing in a similar fashion, then I mean that signals that's not just an event, that's a trend, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, agreed. All right, well, we'll keep everybody up to date on this. So appreciate it, Brian. And we
Thank
want
you.
to thank everybody for tuning in to the Clean Energy Edge. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart Music. We're all over the place. So check us out, subscribe, and we'll be back next week. Thanks.
Perfect.